Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. I'm Johan Ben Zion, and I'm here with Florian Marcus, Estonia presenter, presenter analyst at the Estonia Briefing Center. And we're going to talk about E-stonia and blockchain solutions to governance issues. And it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. The Futurist New Deal has a lot of e-governance initiatives. Foremost of those being blockchain voting, because in the United States we have a lot of issues around voter suppression and democratic pro-democracy concerns generally. And Mr. Marcus, your country is head and shoulders above other countries in the developed world in this area. Nearly every country has had some sort of some municipality or other with some kind of e-voting experiment, but your country, 40% of voters are using this platform, and they seem to be very, very satisfied with it. You are a presenter on this subject. Tell us how you like to introduce this idea to people who are unfamiliar with it.
So I-voting solves one big problem: convenience. The thing is that countries around the world, democracies around the world, offer possibilities like postal voting or voting through an embassy or something like that, which is extremely costly. Postal voting is very unsafe as well, because the state does not know whether you have been forced to vote for a certain candidate or not. And you don't know whether your vote is counted the correct way. With I-voting, you have a very simple way of casting your vote. So you need your electronic ID card to identify yourself online. You cast your vote, and that's it. So it really takes basically exactly as long as you need to decide which candidate you want to vote for. For me, in the last elections, it took 1 month. 1 minute.
Very nice. Very nice. And one of the biggest concerns that people in the United States have, I know an awful lot of people on the left who are campaigning for all manner of things, like a better healthcare, a public healthcare system in the United States. They have very heartfelt concerns, but many of them are afraid of taking this step. And one thing that they say, I tried to convince them that we have suppression issues beyond, but they're concerned about the individual black hat hacker. Now you have a two-factor system, pardon me, what's the word? A two-factor safety system for checking your vote that allows someone to vote from their desktop and then check that vote and make changes to that vote from their phone. That makes it extremely difficult for anyone to hack that system in any real number. What do people say about that? Are they happy with this arrangement?
I think, first of all, the security that is added by me being able to vote as many times as I want, and only the last voting being the one that counts, that is a very important point. Secondly, you can find the code repository for the I-voting system on GitHub. The Estonian government uploads the code. So if you're an IT specialist, you don't trust the system, go and take a look. So I'm not an IT expert, but the Estonian government's logic was, the more eyes see this code, the more likely it is that someone with good intentions finds a mistake, potentially, and makes us aware of this. So most countries, they develop those systems behind closed doors. And if you have within the circle of, 20 programmers, you have one person who intentionally builds a backdoor, you will never find out. So the logic of being transparent about the source code is very obvious to many Estonians, and they see the benefit as well.
Yes. And here in the United States, with paper ballots, and then in the 20th century with voting machines, we have had what would be described as generation after generation of wholesale graft in the voting system. Yeah. The notion of burning the ballot box or stuffing the ballot box, these are not just idioms. These are things that happened in the 20th century. They're happening today with these voting systems. There's an entire company, Diebold, who's been very guilty of these kind of misdeeds, so much so that they rebranded. They're still doing these things, but they changed their name. And this level of transparency that you describe is something that is able to elevate in many, many areas, not simply voting, but it's able to elevate participation on the part of citizens, and it's able to elevate an awful lot of glitches and more seriously, party bosses and people in the United States who basically don't work for constituents, they work for lobbies, manipulating these outcomes in a variety of ways, and particularly at the ballot box. There's a lot of applications for this kind of transparency. Before we come back to voting, one thing that someone said after they read the piece that I wrote on e-voting and I-voting in Estonia was that they didn't entirely understand the concept of e-residency. Can you explain that for my friend?
Absolutely. So, hello, friend. So the logic of e-residency is that anyone in the world can basically, you can go on the e-residency website. You pay 100 euros application fee. You will be verified. After 4 to 6 weeks, you go to the closest Estonian embassy or e-residency card pickup point. And when you have that card, first of all, you can create an Estonian company on Estonian legal soil, regardless of your country of residence. So anyone in the world can have an Estonian company. The card also enables you to give digital signatures that are legally binding and valid in any European Union court of law. So if you have an e-residency card, you and I can sign documents all day, every day, and they are legally binding. So I can sell you my car online. You can sell me your favorite toy online. It's not a problem anymore.
And this brings to mind this constellation of services which you are able to provide. Your country is able to provide at effectively a much lower price point by using this virtualization. And this variety of e-governance portals and services that you offer. It's something that a country like the United States doesn't offer, and sometimes these same services will take weeks or months and be accompanied by all manner of problems. What you described, these series of steps that people can take, it's really a breath of fresh air. And I hope that we can convince people in the United States that this is a path worth taking. Now, we mentioned a number. 40% of your voters are using this I-voting specifically. What are the other voters doing? How have those numbers evolved?
So I-voting was made available in 2005. At that time, the very first elections, only a few thousand people voted online because as a concept, it has to sort of gain critical momentum in order to become sort of a public phenomenon in that way. So going from those few thousands, those handfuls of people, to I think in the last elections, in the last parliamentary elections this year, 45% of all votes cast were cast online. Sure. So that's a big development over 10 to 15 years. There are still many people that vote offline because they like the traditional aspect of it. Because they like the family aspect. We're all going to go out on voting day because voting day is not during a work day in Estonia, which is another point that we might have to tackle in the US.
We absolutely must.
So I think for Estonians, the logic is, if I am busy, if I want to spend time with friends, if I want to have a coffee at home, I vote online. And if I want to spend time voting with friends, then I do that. But it's your choice, and you don't get disenfranchised either way, because it is really your decision. Yeah.
And here in the United States, we have a few of these problems with voter suppression. This kind of operates in tandem with another concern, which is voter participation. People feel a certain kind of learned helplessness about being involved in politics. They become less politically literate through this constellation of sentiments. It's a real problem in the United States. Voter participation rates in the United States in midterm elections and local elections are often 30% or lower. It's terrible for these
Yeah.
are eligible voters. It's not the general citizenry. It's eligible
Yeah.
voters. How have you seen voter participation rise since 2005 when you began to implement these
Um,
systems?
s- so I have to say that I am a political scientist myself, and I analyzed voting systems for 4 years straight. So this is sort of my home turf.
Nice.
Voter participation has not significantly increased or decreased over time. It has been relatively stable. Now, many people would say, well, then the system didn't work. I disagree. The thing here is that if there are people that just don't care about politics, and those people will continue not to care about politics whether you put it on their phone or on their laptop. But for all those people that are interested in politics, you have just further democratized democracy because it's more approachable and accessible for you. I-voting does not solve all problems. You have to have a more transparent political system. Questions, especially in the US, such as gerrymandering, the two-party system, all of those things are other factors that contribute to people not being terribly happy about the political situation, perhaps, and thus not participating. But we've seen that talking about participation, one of the biggest voting groups online is age 65 plus.
Mm,
So, because those people have the most trouble going to the voting booth physically.
mm,
So in that way, we have solved a problem for the most vulnerable people of society,
mm,
which I think is a very important sentiment to carry through governance as a whole.
mm. That is incredible. And in fact, this is a constituency in the United States, a demographic that does vote a lot, but
Right.
that participation often does break along socioeconomic lines and other lines, and the numbers in the United States, as I mentioned, they're artificially low. They're being maintained that way through poll taxes, gerrymandering, and the sort of helpless
Identification.
system. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Your identification system is also head and shoulders above of that of even of some of the more advanced countries in this on this particular point. Tell us a little bit about ID in Estonia and why it's superior to that in the United States.
So this is something that many countries in the world still have to sort of solve. In Estonia, the ID card is compulsory. Every
Mm,
person must have one. I personally am not Estonian, I'm German. I came here 4 years ago. And even I, as a German citizen, still get the same Estonian ID card because the government wants us to use all of those digital services online.
mm,
Every ID card has a personal code. So every person has a unique personal number. It is in a way comparable to the social security number in the way that it's being used across all the different disciplines in many different areas. It is different in that it's not a secure number. I can tell you my personal code and you won't be able to do anything with it,
mm.
which is the exact opposite of the social security number, where you will protect that number with your life because otherwise I can get a bank loan in your name, I can rent a car in your name, and so on.
It's a real
Um,
problem.
so having this number not be the key to your information is extremely important. On the back of the card, you've got a chip card, and then you must remember two PIN codes that are connected to your identity. So with this 2 or 3 factor authentication, you're pretty safe.
Mm,
And that's how we use 99% of all government services online in Estonia. Yeah.
mm. And there's quite a lot of identity theft and fraud of this kind in the United States, as you mentioned, along the Social Security number concern as well. That is a fairly commonplace occurrence. It's some millions of people that are
Yeah.
experiencing this, and this system seems like it does make some serious improvements there. You've seen a reduction in these kinds of things over these course of these years, I would
Uh,
imagine.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, identity theft in Estonia is extremely difficult to pull off in the first place. And then also, Estonians don't put so much data in private entities and companies. I think recently we had the data leak in, was it One Capital, where just millions of social security numbers just are out in the open on GitHub now,
Yes.
which is the problem, of course. So this level of um, the level of data security is so much higher in Estonia as well, which is why Estonians are happier to trust the system as a whole. Yeah.
Mm. Now you mentioned that you are a political scientist with an expertise in these blockchain related ideas, and you also mentioned that you moved from other parts of Europe, from Germany, I would presume, to Estonia. Was it because of you were inspired by this system and these workings?
I would love
Maybe
to
that's
say
too personal.
I would no problem. I would love to say yes, not really. I found out at some point that I was born on the exact same day that Estonia regained independence from the Soviet Union, and I
Ah.
wanted to check out the country that is quote unquote as old as me. I loved it. I did my second master's in Estonia, and then I did partially stay because digitalization here is so advanced. You know, if for my parents' generation, if the internet would explode tomorrow and they would be stuck with letters and fax machines and telephone, they would be perfectly fine.
Mm.
But you and I, we know that the internet works. You know that private services have been working for the last 20 years, sending emails around the world for free, quite safely. So all of these things, they work. It's just that the government needs to be on the same level as private sector entities. And in Estonia, that is truly the case. So I can pay my taxes within 30 seconds online. This solves a problem for me. So that made it very attractive to stay here after university as well.
Mm. Very nice, very nice. And I think a lot of my listeners and viewers and readers are actually not members of my party, the Transhumanist Party. Quite a lot of them come just from other networks, Justice Democrats and Greens and so forth. But one thing that the people in the Transhumanist Party do concern themselves with is something you alluded to. It's techno-sluggishness in institutions, and it's an area in which people, maybe right libertarian people, will often point to bureaucracies as being poor at relative to private industry, and I do place a certain degree of stock in that assessment. But there's also the sense in which in the United States, where we're not really giving it the college try, making these kind of improvements that you have, and in fact, that's not just a temporary oversight or a small mistake. It is the result of a country that is effectively run by lobbyists and subverts the will of the people pretty routinely. And so it's nice to have this perspective on this kind of agility with systems, from a governance perspective.
That's great to hear, and I think we also need to tell the story to the Estonians because they very often don't realize what kind of wonderland they live in. So when the first time that they move to another country, they sort of realize, wait, how do you pay taxes here? You've got this paper and it takes 4 hours to fill out. And then they return very happily to their home country as well. And we've got many foreigners who come here to the E-Estonia Briefing Center as well, who see this for the first time and think, how is this possible that we don't have this stuff? I mean, we've got IT specialists in every country. You've got plenty of smart people in the US. You've got plenty of smart people in Germany. How is it possible that we've been lagging behind this post-Soviet country for the last 15 years? Yeah. So it's wonderful that more and more politicians, that more and more parties start seeing these developments as important and even crucial because they will be left behind if they don't follow suit immediately. Yeah. So that's great.
The Futurist New Deal, my platform, it's e-governance is one of the centerpieces, but it is first and foremost an economic reform platform, and the most controversial of these points is a basic income for $52,000 a year for every adult, and it is paid for by something called a federal land dividend. There's a large number of federal lands that are held by the United States. And about 85% of those are not national parks or specially preserved lands. So our idea is to lease them to carbon neutral companies and companies that have also hew to a specific design aesthetic. And in doing so, we can be generating $173 trillion in tax revenue over 10 years. And that is enough to fund a middle class income, which would stem the tide of this deterioration of the United States middle class that we've seen for precisely generally the lack of foresight that you described a moment ago, not being forward thinking in the way that Estonia has in policy matters with respect to citizens. Now, you mentioned a little bit about options in Estonia for taxes and e-governance portals along this line. It's something that I haven't written about as much, and my partners haven't written about as much in talking about the futurist New Deal, but it was something that I wanted to touch upon in those discussions. So tell us a little bit about paying your taxes in Estonia and how that is digitized.
So to use an example, the DMV of Estonia is online, as you would expect. When I log into the system, it asks me, do you want to use this portal right now in your capacity as a private individual or as the owner of your own company? Basically asking, if you want to sell your car, are you trying to sell your personal car or your company car? Yeah. So it knows immediately, or it registers in which role, in which capacity you do what. This is then connected to the information in the tax authority. So when I next year want to declare my taxes, it already knows whether I have a company or a private car because it remembers from last year. So with this principle, the entire tax declaration is pre-filled out by the government for me, for my perusal. So basically, it gives me a notification on the first day when I'm able to pay my taxes. It says, here's what we calculated. Look over it, look through it. If you think it's right, then confirm. If you think there's something missing, then tell us all about it. But I mean, I've been here for 4 years. It's never happened that it sort of missed anything or miscalculated something. And then you click accept, and then you're done. If you have to pay extra back to the state, then you can do that online within the portal. If you get some sort of refund, then it's going to take 1 working week to get your money back. So this process of going through your taxes and clicking accept, it's going to take 30 seconds and 2 clicks.
Very nice. Yeah. Yes. Pardon me. The futurist New Deal is an economic reform ticket that's kind of the top of the platform. And while we don't see a dramatic reduction in corporate tax rates, there is a rise in corporate tax rates in our plan. But one of the points in this is to have there's something called the Freedom of Information Act, and what we propose to do is have companies, large corporations, be required to make a significant amount of metadata about their tax returns and information open to the public, because in the United States, it's not an exaggeration to say that many trillions of dollars that would be contributing to the public trust and public well-being are lost, but because we very happily facilitate tax cheats in our tax code. And you mentioned the ease with which this is done. Our tax code, by contrast, is kept purposefully arcane. It's kept difficult because then it's easier for an army of tax lawyers from corporations to gain that system, whereas an ordinary person, it makes more difficulty for them. But that's again, government by the lobbyists and for the lobbyists in the United States, unfortunately. But your system has many things to recommend it. Have you noticed any reductions in those specific concerns around people gaming the system for the purpose of tax fraud?
I mean, of course, let's say the power of the lobbyists and other interest groups in Estonia is not as big as it is in the United States. Just by legal default, it can't be, and also because Estonia is a comparably small country, the economic interests are not as big and pressing as they might be in the US. We have obviously with that closed several loopholes that might have been exploited a few times. So that was certainly helpful. As part of the e-business registry, you can also see who owns what company and like who is where on what kinds of different boards as well. So it's extremely transparent in seeing might there be an overlap of interest, a conflict of interest, even perhaps? You can also see the annual reports of countries, of companies online. So you can see before you do business with a certain company, have they been able to pay their bills over the last 2 years? Are they running on credit and fumes right now? So you can see all of that before you even make a project with them. And all of that has helped stabilize the Estonian economy even further. And streamline it, of course, as well. Because most governments, most business registries, they have that sort of service, but you have to show up in person and go through the company books. Why do we do that? We have a website. Why don't we use a website to display that sort of stuff? So in Estonia, all of this is very transparent. And I, as a business owner, I have to show my annual reports online. You can see whether I have any other board members as part of the company and so on. It's all there. So that helps trust in different institutions and companies as well.
Yes. And this, not only this Freedom of Information initiative or the kinds of measures that you've described, but overall, this panopticon society, this open society paradigm, it does have many, many things to recommend it. Greater ease of fixing exploits, greater efficiency, lower cost, all manner of network effects coming into play there. So it is really an incredible thing that you've done, and just having the political will to not allow lobbyists to take the wheel as they have in the U.S. and to a lesser degree some other developed countries. Is truly an accomplishment, and the people of your country should be proud of this. And I hope, at the very least, that people, my viewers, will have this takeaway that maybe blockchain voting and other blockchain initiatives are not such a far-fetched idea as they tend to be. The people tend to be quite dismissive of this in the United States. People who I'm going to be considered to be a longtime allies, quite dismissive of this. So I'm really glad and thank you again for doing this. It's a great kindness that you're doing me. One thing in the Futurist New Deal, it's actually, some people have said it could, depending on the way that it would be implemented, it could be unconstitutional in the United States, which is the incentivizing of full voter participation in different ways. Now, people on the right are very quick to be strict constructionists of the Constitution when it comes to anything that might actually help people. Have people in your circles ever talked about trying to get those numbers up? Do you have any recommendations for ways to for the people in the United States, or for anyone? We have these artificially low voter turnouts. We want to turn that around.
So when we're talking about nudging or trying to get more people to vote, Estonia is very careful in this because it can be a conscious decision not to vote or to spoil your ballot or anything like that. When we're talking about countries where where voter turnout is particularly low for structural inherent reasons, as is the case in the US, of course there must be reforms. Estonia doesn't really do that. We have a voter turnout, don't quote me on this, I think it's around 65% or something, which is not super high, not super low. It's somewhere in the middle for most European countries, and they're quite happy with that as well. I think philosophically the state approaches the situation as follows: we have to make it as easy as possible for the person to vote. Whether they want to vote or not, up to them. But everybody has to have the simple ability without registering 1 month in advance for a postal ballot or for the voting booth to arrive in a pensioner home or something. So these things have to be simplified, and that's the duty of the state in that way. But yes, more structural reforms have to come for the United States and other countries for sure.
Yes, and it's not unheard of in the developed world. There's some, I think, 13 or 14 countries that have compulsory voting, including a number of wealthy countries, and it's not unheard of. I'm in favor of this in the United States just because we've had so much voter suppression over these 3 or 4 decades, compounding problems along these lines. The previous president, President Barack Obama, suggested this one time, and the Republican leadership were very quick to brush this aside or laugh this off. But you could see they were getting a little hot under the collar, because that's their bread and butter, and to a lesser extent, that's the two-party system's bread and butter in the United States. Is being able to really dystopian in micromanagement of these systems to the harm of citizens. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Now, do you have these kinds of concerns with? Well, you mentioned that there's relatively a little lobbyist influence. Is there any kind of creep? Do you sometimes have people saying this lobby is kind of moving, trying to nudge us away from this protection that we have, or that, without getting maybe too specific as to specific industry?
No, I think we can talk about industries that just have a very, very natural, and to an extent, even with good intentions, understandable interest in citizens' data. One very good example would be the insurance companies. If they would know, and the pharma companies as well, if they would know exactly how many people have what kind of cancer and how did it develop and at what stage and what age and so on, I mean, that's useful information as well. Even if you have very good intentions. Estonia prefers to err on the side of caution there, because ultimately privacy must be upheld, because the citizens must be able to trust the system in this regard. Which is why we have in Estonia an approach called Truth by Design, which means that in my citizen portal, I can see every single time who has accessed what part of my data at what point in time and for what reason. So this is a lot of transparency that the state offers. So I can see whether somebody might have done it with bad intentions or not, and then I can go to court against those people. But it is cryptologically verified and time-stamped that this person did this. This is how in the early 2000s there were a few, like a handful of doctors who thought that they could look at medical data of people who were not their patients. There was one doctor who looked at his ex-girlfriend's medical data to see whether she might have been pregnant with someone else. I mean, first of all, of course, that's absolutely terrible. Second, this is what you go on Instagram for these days, because you don't have to go into the medical data. But disregarding that, this access was immediately logged and timestamped, and the person lost his license. Yeah. So there have to be draconic, strict fines and punishments for these infractions when it comes to privacy, because data protection for the average citizen must be maintained and upheld at all times. Yeah.
It's interesting to touch upon that a little bit, because the big data as it relates to medical data is an interesting area. So the Transhumanist Party is people who are techno-optimists, interested in using advanced technology in various ways. But one of the things that tends to unify all of us is, compared to the average citizen, is an interest in longer lifespans or super longevity. And this is not something that's been achieved. It's speculative as to whether it's been achieved at this point. It's certainly, we believe it's on the horizon. But these kind of, it seems like almost like in many countries, maybe there could be a public-private consortium that could develop along these lines with the use of this medical data as it becomes more robust and comprehensive, that would really allow us to be creating interventions at an early stage and oversight for everyone along the way that would allow for dramatically longer lifespans. My local party that I'm the chair of, the Arizona Transhumanist Party, is actually working on a somewhat similar initiative, but we have a lot of holes in our system here in the United States. We do not have a public health service as you do. We do not have Medicare for all. It's a hot button issue in amongst the Democrats and amongst Americans. It's been promoted incredibly of the last few years, and I hope that it will come to pass as soon as possible. But a system like yours is better suited to be maybe ported onto using blockchain medicine, which you do also describe. Tell us a little bit about the state of blockchain medicine in Estonia.
Okay, before I talk about blockchain medicine, I have to say blockchain is not the silver bullet for all solutions. It can be very
good point.
It can be very useful in specific circumstances. The usual issue, legally speaking, with blockchain is that blockchain is famous for not forgetting stuff. It always remembers. But in the EU, we have the right to be forgotten online. So these two basic principles are fundamentally opposed. With regards to blockchain use in medical systems, we have, however, found probably a nice compromise. So part of our medical data is secured through the blockchain in an encrypted fashion. So our data is not technically stored on the blockchain, but a representation of that data is. This means, for example, it's exactly the difference between data security and data integrity. Data security means regular firewalls, security systems, and so on to make sure that no one gets in. But with medical data, there's also the concern: what if someone changes my data? What if there's a hack from another country where my blood group gets changed? Yeah, I'm a different blood type. That's a potential disaster. So in this case, the blockchain secures this so that it can't even be changed because it is secured through a ledger. So in that regard, there are use cases for blockchain, and medical blockchain is certainly one of them.
There are issues amongst techno-optimists where many people might tend to favor even greater deregulatory approaches. My view is that most areas, particularly around healthcare, have been deregulated to a disgusting degree. It used to be illegal before 1974 for the kind of profiteering on the deaths of many thousands of people that occurs by the insurance industry and big pharma here in the United States. And each one of those golden parachutes that's given out to one of these executives represents the death of hundreds or thousands of people. It's a horror. And people in the United States, they don't recognize this. But there, on the flip side of that, for techno-optimists, we sometimes like to talk about having a certain kind of choice in experimenting with new systems and new medications and overall streamlining processes where appropriate and safe to allow for the more rapid advance of techno-progress in biomedicine. How do you weigh those concerns for people? You know, I'm 39 years old, and I hope to live a preternaturally long life, but I have no guarantee of this. None of us has any guarantees. So I have a specific incentive in wanting to do what small amount I can to facilitate this kind of techno-progress. How do you suss all that out?
I think when we talk about the exact targets of or goals of your party, there is no party in Estonia that has that sort of explicit target, and it's still quite separated. So you still have to conduct separate research. So for example, we have a current gene donor program where almost 20% of the Estonian population have donated their DNA for targeting and early warning systems for different illnesses and so on. But they still have to still have to donate their DNA separately. It can't be taken from the data that's already in the system. So again, Estonia likes to be careful with that and rather tend towards more privacy here. I think that some of these goals are extremely laudable, but at the same time, it's a very hard philosophical argument to make that everybody should play a role in this, even if they don't want to. So it's something that a country has to decide for itself, quite frankly, and the US certainly would have to make that decision as well. Yeah.
And I would imagine that your country, the sort of median citizen is probably not so different from the U.S. on this. The Transhumanist Party is quite small,
Yeah.
and I would regard most people. I think probably 98% of people, basically people who are not Christian Scientists who aver medicine, or people who have other personal reasons for disliking medicine. 98% of people we could rightly describe as de facto life extensionists, people who will go to the doctor every 6 months, and if that doctor in 5 years says we have an injection of nanobots to fix your liver, and then you'll be able to live to 105, they're going to go for it. They don't have to have a philosophical devotion to this idea to benefit from that. But having that political will amongst the citizenry, it does make a difference. This is how these kinds of things do come to pass. I was before this. I was looking at a few articles about e-governance and medicine in Estonia, and some really fascinating developments. People in the United States don't always realize that other countries might have dramatically different approaches to governance and to various municipal and bureaucratic concerns as well. And it really is nice to be able to share these notions with you here. Now, earlier I asked you about one thing that my friend mentioned was quite a surprise, talking about e-residency. What other kinds of surprises are people having outside of Estonia when they're learning about your approach to e-governance?
Okay, first, maybe one thing that is not technically e-governance, but it's aided by e-governance. In Tallinn, we have free public transport for all residents of Tallinn. How do you verify that's socialism? I know. How do you verify that that you are residing in Tallinn? Well, through this X row that helps all the different servers talk to each other securely. So there are so many different even private sector applications for talking to government entities. Yeah. What else are they surprised by? I think the depth in which Estonia is digitalized. I mean, when we talk about taxes, when we talk about giving a digital signature, those are very basic things. You can pay your taxes online since 1999. You can give digital signatures since 2002. But there are also some extremely obscure and niche services that are online. So around Christmas time, Estonians like to go to the state forest, say, I am standing in front of a 2-meter tall Christmas tree right now. I would like to cut that down. They go to the state forestry website online, and they register that. They give the height of the tree, and then they pay 10 euros online, cut it down, take it home. Yeah. So all of those tiny services, they're also online. My fishing license and my hunting license, they're digitally renewable. So I think the depth surprises people. And then the realization of actually doing it yourself. So when I say paying taxes online takes 30 seconds, that's nice. And yes, the time saving is a point, but also what about the stress? What about having to, I don't know, take your focus away from work or your family and actually sitting down at your desk to fill out this thing? Like the amount of life quality or to what extent your life quality improves is remarkable, and that surprises people as well.
And I just want to say that this free transit, free mass transit initiative is an incredibly smart one, reducing the amount of traffic on the streets, increasing public health outcomes by reducing pollution and other concerns of this kind. And people in the United States, there's often a sense that it's almost a sense that we have to penalize working people at every turn. We have to penalize. You have to pay a poor tax no matter where you are. And systems like this, they're built with that sort of poor tax notion, that underlying logic anyway, into them. But oftentimes the costs of administering these systems, much of the cost derives from that punitive side of things, and that's true in mass transit. It's by removing that from the equation, it's not the great loss of revenue that people suppose, because there's far less infrastructure and personnel that has to be built out and maintained in those systems. Do you have any self-driving elements in trains in Tallinn?
First, one more thing I have to say. Just after free public transport was introduced in Tallinn, like a year after or something, the first politician said, see, we didn't decrease the number of cars in the city. Yes, of course not. People don't actively start selling their cars once public transport is free. But the next time that you're thinking about buying a new car, then maybe you don't. So these are the kinds of policies that take 5 to 10 years to truly flourish and develop and change the city landscape. That's something that I might have wanted to add. Talking about self-driving cars, they are testing them is legal since 2017. We've had them being tried out and tested on public roads already, with people for big political events, venue transport, and so on. We also have parcel robots that drive around the city that bring you your parcel or your groceries from the supermarket, which you can order via an app. So all of these things they work, and it's quite astonishing to see how this mentality in Estonia is. We are a test bed country. So there are big companies that come here because they know the laws they're rigid, but very forward thinking. So you can just try it out on a nation scale, and then see whether it could work for your own country as well. Yeah.
I imagine there might have been some trepidation on the part of politicians around 2005 in your country, in starting to kind of undertake this sea change in the approach to the way that governance is done. Have there been any initiatives which proved to be more troublesome, or have there been any citizen backlash to some advanced technology? Where I haven't heard too many horror stories, but I wonder if you had anything.
So the first draft policy for digitalization of Estonia was signed by the government in 1994. That's when they decided we should probably put everything online, which was a big risk at the time, because at that point the dot-com bubble hadn't even started to grow. So it was a big risk at the time, but it thankfully worked out. So which is why I have a job today. So at the start, it was a very critical political decision. Yes, it was informed by IT specialists, but at the end of the day, a politician has to stand up in parliament and say, we should probably do this. Yeah. So at the time, it was quite contested to an extent. But soon after, the first services came online in 1999. Again, solving the biggest problems for the biggest part of society first, tax declaration. People saw that these things worked. And today, you don't have a single party in parliament that says, well, we should backtrack on this. We should maybe digital is not the answer. Of course, Estonian parties and politicians, they argue about policies the same way they do in every other country in the world. But the understanding, the experience, digital was the right way to go. That one is pretty commonly accepted. Of course, you have a small minority in every country that distrust the government forever, regardless of what you do. But broadly speaking, there is inherent trust in the system because of the transparency that it allows, and simply the success that Estonia has experienced over the last 20 years, both domestically and abroad in its reputation. So no real backlashes as far as I'm aware.
The flip side of that, it brings to mind something that you alluded to here. The flip side of that might be, so I did familiarize myself a little bit with the parties in Estonia, and there's at least one party that would be an e-governance party promoting. What sort of initiatives are those activists generally promoting for the future of e-governance in Estonia? Is there anything coming down the pipeline, or anything that those people might like to see coming down the pipeline?
Sorry, which party are you talking about, or which?
I don't have that link right in front of me.
No problem.
I'll pull it up. Okay, let's see. So there is well, richness of life was one that has
The
e-democracy.
Biodiversity Party.
Yes.
So I think in some ways they sound quite close to your party actually. Also with I believe they were talking about basic universal basic income and
Mm,
so on. They have not made it into Parliament in
mm,
the last elections, and they also didn't make it into the European Parliament in the recent elections. So they don't play so much of a role on the political landscape. But I think it's fair to say, regardless of whether you're a conservative or a liberal or a social democrat in Estonia, that all the different parties have digitalization efforts.
mm,
They have innovation teams. Every ministry has an innovation and cybersecurity team as well. So there are so many different stakeholders that all are interested in advancing the digital footprint of Estonia.
mm,
Which, I mean, when we're talking about current initiatives or philosophical discussions in Estonia, one interesting thing is that of the AI judge.
mm,
So that small civic and criminal claims of, I think, up to 8,000 euros could be solved by an AI, so that you just
mm,
give all the different reports and witness statements and so on to the AI, and the AI comes up with a verdict. Now, if both sides, both conflict parties agree that this verdict is fair, case solved, right? If one or both parties disagree, then it would go to a human judge. So there is no human element being left out if someone disagrees with the verdict. And even if only 5% of all of those cases are solved that way, then we just saved 5% of the resources of the Department of Justice.
mm,
So those are sort of philosophical discussions, still very much in the early stages, but important discussions that are being held right now.
mm. Yes, and the notion of using automation and advanced algorithms to make the legal system a better thing, not just streamline it or
Yeah.
make it cheaper or efficient, but reduce human error. I mean, I do have maybe it's a mawkish sentiment, but I do have some kind of attachment to the U.S. legal system. But the 20th century model of the U.S. legal system, whatever its good intentions, and it's made by people to serve people and protect people. At the same time, all of those people have prejudices, and all of those people have a tendency to make mistakes. And so we have, it was an unseemly how many people were executed before we started to use DNA testing. It was unseemly, and it's unseemly that people are executed at all, in my view. But in pardon me, there's all kinds of ways in which we could improve the legal system by using advanced algorithms, and it's another example of a thing in which people might assume it's science fiction, but it's not science fiction. Estonia is implementing these things as well, we might conceivably be moving to this time where the entirety of the legal system is maintained by many thousands of advanced algorithms that are doing a much better job in ways that we can't even maintain our legal system with the services that it provides now, the kinds of things that it does now. But there are some areas in which we could kind of branch out if we had that number of man hours to be doing that. Are there any other points about that sort of branching out? More is being done with less in Estonia as a result of these AI judges and this constellation of things.
First, we have to be clear. AI at this point in time is not at a level where it can make reliable, good verdicts or sort of have very good evaluations. I mean, that's why even states in the United States, I believe California has banned facial recognition because it's just terrible at this point. Will it be fantastic in 50 years? Maybe, but not right now. That being said, what Estonia does right now, which does not include so much AI, but just automation, proactive governance services. So if the government knows you just got a child because the child was registered under you as being the guardian or parent, And the state also knows your address. And the state also knows that primary school education is compulsory in Estonia. Why doesn't it tell you, congratulations on your child, on the birth of your child? You have to give it to primary school at some point. So why don't we register a place for your child 6 years into the future right now? So that also the school gets a notification. In 6 years, you will have 200 more students than you have right now. You need to build 5 new classrooms. You need to get 10 new teachers, and so on. And those are physical things that take time in the real world to build, to process, and so on. So there are still so many things where Estonia can do more streamlining of services. And this is what Estonia is focusing on right now. So by the end of 2020, there should be at least 7 fully automated proactive government services, and those will be further expanded in the near future as well.
That's incredible. That's just incredible. And this is the difference between a country where people have the political will and where we, outside watchdog agencies, they look at many states in the United States and many features and facets of the federal government, and they say, you don't actually have what appears to be a functioning representative government here. You have what's basically a thinly veiled oligarchy. And that's a serious problem. It's no laughing matter. So I think your country is an example of what can be achieved when people do have this political will. I was very quick to criticize these lobbies. These lobbies do have natural inclinations towards protecting their pro-business interests, and so it's not just these boogeymen who have made the mistakes here. It is the people who have not firmly stated their wishes and rights in this context in the United States. And that's the thing, and that's the way that we start to fix this as well. And you see people in the United States changing in this regard. One other way that people in the United States have changed in a negative regard, I think, in recent years relative to that, and I think this is something that your e-governance would contribute positively to indirectly, is that there's feelings of mistrust of one another are at an almost epidemic level in the United States, and feelings of mistrust of governments are at an almost epidemic level in the United States. Now, these kind of initiatives that you have, they make people feel that the government is on their side. They make people feel that this is not a dystopian nightmare to live in this country. That it's something that maybe kind of works. Have you seen studies to this effect, voter satisfaction and so forth?
I mean, of course, it's very hard to quantify happiness in general. It's very tricky. I like dogs.
You're playing a dangerous game.
So I would be careful with putting too much faith in those numbers. But what I would say is that it certainly helped Estonians trust state services, trust the police as a friendly, helpful actor within the country. When we talk about all of those services, we see that the government has shown itself to be a trustworthy adjudicator that is usually on your side, which is something that most countries have to or could learn from Estonia. One more thing, you were talking about the will of the people and how this attitude is slowly changing. I think this is something extremely important because many people know how things can be done digitally, but they are not passionate about that change. Because digitalization is a very, very cold topic, We can talk about refugees, pro or against, you will have an opinion. You can talk about taxes up or down, you will have a very strong opinion because it's about your stuff. Yeah. But with digitalization, the issue is that it's a very cold and remote topic in that way. Even though the bureaucracy in most countries, US, Germany, it's very slow, it's very expensive, it's very annoying to go there. And it still works, the building is not on fire. It still provides most of the services. And that's why you and I, we don't go out on the street to protest in favor of more digitalization. This is something where we as the public are also we have to pull our weight and say, we demand from our politicians that they do something about this because these things work in other countries. So this is something that we can't fully blame the political caste for. It's also something that we have to step up our game at as well. But yes.
I had one more question that I wanted to
Sure.
bring up. One of the, top concerns, and it's one that is very hard for me to dismiss out of hand. And I'll describe it by way of describing another interview. I spoke to the founder of the Flux Australia Party, a gentleman named Max Kay. And the Flux Party is a blockchain party. They're also post-partisan, a little bit similar to the Richness of Life Party, I think, on one or two dimensions. But we talked a little bit about the implementation of blockchain voting in Australia, which is 22 million people. The US is about 13 times as many people. Estonia is just a little bit smaller, a little on the smaller side relative to Australia. Do you think that the system that you have is implementable in larger countries? This is one way in which these ideas are controlled, and many ideas. Well, we can't have nice things in the United States, just too big.
I was fearing a difficult question, but thankfully you gave me a very easy one. The beauty of IT solutions is that they are scalable, right? So my point is a very simple one. If the US was able to build up a paper-based bureaucracy for 300 million people, then it is able to have a server room for 300 million people. So scalability is not the issue. What can be an issue, and for some countries more than for others, is the federalized structure of government. Germany and the US are very much in line here. In Germany, you can study at university to become a high school teacher, and then not be allowed to teach at a high school in a different federal state. And when we talk about this kind of federation, where everybody can basically do their own thing, legally speaking as well, then we don't have to talk about joint data standards or protocols or anything. So this has to be very clear. When we talk about digitalization, it must be a nationwide effort, because we are identified nationwide. Yeah, you don't have an Ohio ID, you have an American passport, right? So these things have to be done on a national level. And once this consensus is there, you can implement national solutions like electronic ID, like the X-Road to help all the different servers talk to each other securely. So this understanding must be there as well. But yes, in itself, absolutely scalable. Yeah.
Yes. And I make this point to people, and sometimes it falls on deaf ears. Being in third-party politics, I know people have quite different ideologies from my own. I interviewed three top-tier Libertarian Party candidates, and those people are very much anti-federalist. They're more in line with what you said about Germany and in those separate municipalities, or going far beyond that, even in some of their desires. And I like to make the point of saying that this digital democracy and direct democracy may actually be the best way to lead to some of those outcomes that they actually want. Greater personal freedoms and greater voluntarism. When you have this higher level of satisfaction with the government, there is less of a sense that people feel that there is not voluntarism and that sort of thing. But there's real outcomes that derive from that as well, aside from people feeling happy.
I think we have to move away from the question of many people try to make digitalization about as being part of a policy question. Digitalization is not a policy. It's a way of life. It's an alternative to paper-based bureaucracy. Now, if anyone in the room can give me valid, good arguments against digitalization, where paper is demonstrably more secure or cheap or accountable or anything, I'll be more than happy to listen to those arguments. But when we talk about it like that, people don't usually come up with any strong counter arguments. So ultimately, digitalization should be a natural way of development of society. Just as much as it has been on a personal level. We use phones, we use computers. So why don't we let the government use phones and computers? That's a very simple question. And then you can talk about for what purposes you want to implement those things. whether you're a libertarian, a social democrat, conservative, whatever you are, you can implement the policies that you favor. But digitalization as a ground rule should be pretty easy to accept, I think, and it has been in Estonia for the last 25 years.
Mm, very nice. Yeah, it says there's very little fraud. We didn't actually talk about any of these instances of fraud or concerns about a voter fraud. Voter fraud is kind of a strange. It's doctrine of the Republican Party, but it's also largely mythology. It's largely a way of implementing a backdoor for implementing these voter suppression measures and other measures, gerrymandering, all of the dark money constellation of concerns. But people are quite happy in your country with these systems. I think of the U.S. resistance to this is a little bit like maybe just about 1 century ago. People getting in car accidents. They say cars are unsafe. Let's all go back to just riding horses again. The horses are a lot less safe and a lot less practical. That's kind of where we are with digitization and e-governance. And it's unfortunate, and it just argues from a naturalist logical fallacy in many cases. Or nostalgia. This is how things should be. This is how things have always been. That's not an organizing principle for society, in my view.
I think the car analogy is actually very good. We didn't destroy and burn all the cars. No, we put seatbelts on. Yeah,
yes,
we implemented
yes.
airbags. We have safety procedures. And that's the same way it works with digitalization as well. I can assure you that the level of cybersecurity in 1998 was not the same level that it is today, and it shouldn't. Yeah, you have to be agile there as a government, but just like cars were for the 20th century and also for the 21st, digitalization is certainly the answer for the 21st century as well.
So, in closing, what do you say again to the individual who's concerned with hacking these systems or concerned with the implementation of these systems? What's my elevator pitch to people to get them to accept blockchain voting and maybe keep an open mind about these other e-governance portals and opportunities?
Just 2 words: be transparent. So Estonia allows white hat hackers to attack its systems. It has hackathons where it gives out prize money to people if they are able to hack the system. They can't. Be transparent about your open source code so that the more people see that code, the more secure your system is. And that's a very simple foundation to build your e-governance and system on. Yeah.
I'd like to come to Estonia sometime. I haven't been. I traveled in some Benelux countries, but I haven't made my way to Estonia. But you are doing excellent and incredible work. I thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to do this. And I really think that it will give even a lot of techno-optimists who are in favor of these things some new insights into near-term prospects for us, because our party is it's a proliferation of tongues in terms of describing all manner of science fiction notions rather than talking about realistic policy implementations. And it's become one of my biggest pet peeves in recent times. So I think that this discussion and your insights into this really offer something to this conversation. And I don't say this lightly. I hope we get a chance to talk again, but I hope that we can describe strategies for moving the United States more quickly in a better direction with your help, because we really do have a lot of problems here, and they're not problems that cannot be solved. They're not acts of God. They are things that smart people can take an interest in and work together on to fix. And I thank you for giving us some good ideas along those lines.
Thank you very much for having me. And of course, both you and your listeners are always welcome to come to the E-Estonia Briefing Center to see this stuff firsthand in Tallinn, Estonia.
Excellent. I'm going to take you up on that offer. Thank you, Florian. It was great talking.